Something changed overnight in Washington, not a rumor, not a vague headline. Actual documents, 184 pages of them, quietly dropped on Wednesday. By the time most people woke up, the political landscape around Attorney General Pam Bondi had already shifted. I started reading the filing at 4:00 a.m., going page by page, line by line. What's inside those documents is the reason Washington is suddenly on edge. 3 days, that's all it took for this story to go from a whisper in congressional offices to the president himself posting publicly about serious allegations. In those same 3 days, photos surfaced of a $31 million waterfront mansion in Palm Beach. Financial transfers appeared in the records, communications logs emerged, and suddenly the Attorney General, the nation's top law enforcement officer, was at the center of one of the fastest-moving political controversies of the year. You probably saw the headlines: Bondi under scrutiny, Trump demanding answers. But the headlines didn't show the details buried inside the filing itself, and those details are what actually matter. Let's slow this down and walk through it. Pam Bondi isn't just any cabinet official. She served as Florida's Attorney General for years and became one of Donald Trump's most visible defenders long before joining his administration. She stood by him during 2 impeachment fights, publicly backed him when others stayed silent, and eventually helped lead the legal transition team after his election. In January 2025, she was sworn in as Attorney General of the United States. From the beginning, she was considered one of Trump's most loyal allies in Washington. That context matters because the allegations in these newly surfaced documents aren't about something from years ago. They aren't about a speech she gave before entering government or a consulting contract from her private career. The allegations are about financial activity that may have continued while she was already serving as Attorney General. And the person now publicly demanding accountability happens to be the same president who appointed her. That's why this situation escalated so quickly. The timeline starts a few weeks ago. According to the filing submitted to the Senate Judiciary Committee, an anonymous source approached congressional oversight staff with a package of financial records. The documents allegedly showed connections between Bondi and a property development entity linked to foreign investors. At first, staffers treated it like they treat most tips in Washington, with caution. Then, 3 independent forensic accountants reviewed the records. Their job wasn't to interpret politics. Their job was to confirm whether the financial documents themselves were legitimate. According to the filing, they verified the authenticity of the transaction records. That's when the first leak happened. On Monday, a political newsletter published a brief report mentioning possible financial conflicts involving Bondi. It didn't include many specifics, just enough to spark curiosity. 2 days later, the story exploded. Photos appeared online showing a massive waterfront mansion in Palm Beach undergoing renovation, construction crews, permits, ocean access property. Estimated value $31 million. By Wednesday night, the president himself was posting about very serious allegations. But the real story isn't the photos. It's what the documents say. I pulled the filing submitted to the Senate Judiciary Committee and started going through it. Page 47 is where things start getting interesting. The document states that Bondi allegedly maintained a controlling interest in a company called Coastal Meridian Holdings through a Delaware-registered subsidiary. According to the filing, this interest existed despite statements made during her confirmation hearing suggesting she had divested certain financial holdings. That's not speculation. That's the language inside the filing itself. If that claim is accurate, it means the financial structure connected to the property development group remained active even after she became Attorney General. Then you get to page 89. This section contains wire transfer records. According to the filing, approximately $47 million moved from a Cyprus-based account into Coastal Meridian Holdings between March and September of 2025. That timeline is significant because Bondi had already been confirmed and sworn in by that point. So the alleged financial transfers happened while she was already serving as the nation's top law enforcement official. When you place those 2 pieces together, the ownership structure and the transfer records, you start to see why investigators began asking questions. I read that section 3 times just to be sure I wasn't misinterpreting it. The pattern described in the filing is straightforward. During confirmation testimony, Bondi reportedly stated that she did not maintain foreign financial entanglements, but according to the financial records included in the appendix, multiple accounts connected to foreign entities remained active. The transactions are documented across several exhibits labeled C through L in the filing. That alone would be enough to trigger scrutiny. The reason that name matters is because the company is reportedly under investigation by the Department of Justice for possible sanctions violations. Let that sink in for a moment. According to the filing, the Attorney General of the United States exchanged emails with executives at a company that her own department was investigating. The first time I read that section, I assumed I misunderstood it. So I went back and checked again. It's there. 37 separate emails listed in the log. Now, the filing doesn't include the full contents of every email, but it does confirm the existence of the communications and the dates they occurred. And those dates fall within the period when the DOJ investigation into the company was active. That's where things start getting even more complicated because the next section of the document includes an internal Department of Justice memo. According to the filing, a career prosecutor raised concerns about a potential conflict of interest related to the Mediterranean Crown investigation. The memo reportedly recommended that Bondi recuse herself from any involvement with the case. That memo was written in November 2025, but according to the timeline in the document, the recommendation never moved forward. Instead, the case was reassigned, and the prosecutor who flagged the issue was transferred to a field office in Montana. The filing notes that the transfer occurred 11 days after the memo was submitted. That detail has raised a lot of questions among investigators reviewing the situation because career prosecutors are typically cautious about raising internal conflict concerns unless they believe the issue is serious. Now let's talk about the mansion because this is the part that made the story visible to the public. The property in Palm Beach is reportedly around 14,000 square FT with direct ocean access. Current estimated value $31 million. Property records link the ownership to Coastal Meridian Holdings, the same entity referenced earlier in the financial filing. Photos leaked Wednesday show ongoing renovation work at the property. Building permits were reportedly issued in August 2025, and construction crews were photographed working at the site. As recently as late February, investigators are now trying to determine who paid for the renovations. According to preliminary financial analysis included on page 156 of the filing, some payments appear to trace back to the same Cyprus-based account mentioned earlier in the wire transfer records. Another detail stands out when you compare this information to Bondi's official financial disclosure. The disclosure she filed with the Office of Government Ethics reportedly lists no property interests exceeding $5 million, but the Palm Beach mansion is valued at roughly $31 million. If investigators confirm the ownership connection, that discrepancy would likely become a central issue in the inquiry. By Tuesday, a congressional inquiry had already begun. By Wednesday morning, the Department of Justice Inspector General opened a separate investigation. The White House counsel's office also began reviewing the documentation internally, and then something unexpected happened. Donald Trump responded publicly. That reaction, what he said and how quickly he said it, is a huge part of why this story is now dominating Washington. Because when a president starts publicly questioning someone he personally appointed, it changes the political dynamics immediately. And what happened next is where things really started to escalate. To understand why the president's response caught so many people off guard, you have to understand the history between Donald Trump and Pam Bondi. Their relationship goes back more than a decade. Long before she became Attorney General, Bondi was already one of Trump's most visible political allies. She endorsed him early during the 2016 campaign at a time when many establishment Republicans were still hesitant. During some of the most intense political battles of his presidency, she defended him publicly and repeatedly. When Trump returned to power and began assembling his administration, her appointment as Attorney General wasn't surprising. In fact, many observers expected it. Loyalty had always been one of the defining characteristics Trump valued in his inner circle. That's why the tone of his reaction on Wednesday night immediately stood out. At exactly 9:47 p.m. Eastern Time, Trump posted on Truth Social. Then he posted again and again, 3 posts in just 11 minutes. The first message said he was looking into very serious allegations about people I trusted. He added that loyalty was important, but so was accountability. The second post promised that answers would be demanded and obtained. The third simply said more information would be coming soon. He didn't mention Bondi by name, but everyone in Washington knew exactly who he was talking about. Within minutes, the political atmosphere shifted. Cable networks began running breaking news banners. Congressional offices started fielding calls from reporters. Senior staff inside federal agencies began trying to figure out what the president's comments meant for the Department of Justice. And that's when another piece of information surfaced. While most people were focusing on the Truth Social posts, a different development was quietly confirmed by 2 separate news outlets. Earlier that evening before the posts, White House Chief of Staff Kevin Hartley had reportedly met with Bondi at DOJ headquarters. The meeting lasted just 23 minutes. No official readout was released, but its timing immediately raised eyebrows. Then, less than an hour later, another movement was noticed. Deputy Attorney General Marcus Webb entered the West Wing. In the normal chain of command, Webb would become acting Attorney General if Bondi stepped down or was removed. By Thursday morning, Webb's public schedule showed a 7 a.m. meeting with the White House counsel's office. Put all of those events together, and the sequence becomes clear. First the private meeting, then the president's public statements, then discussions with the official who would likely replace Bondi if the situation escalated. To many observers, it didn't look like a spontaneous reaction. It looked like a carefully managed distancing process. Sources speaking to political reporters later described the situation using a phrase that's become common in Washington, evaluating transition scenarios. That phrase usually means one thing: exit negotiations. But while the political machinery started turning, Bondi's defenders immediately pushed back against the narrative. And to be fair, they do have arguments worth hearing. Supporters of the Attorney General say the entire situation could be a coordinated political attack. They point out that Washington scandals often begin with strategically timed leaks designed to cause maximum damage. They also note that the original source of the documents remains anonymous. That alone doesn't invalidate the evidence, but it does raise questions about motive. Another point they emphasize involves the company at the center of the controversy. Coastal Meridian Holdings was reportedly established in 2019. That was years before Bondi joined the administration. Her supporters argued that the company's structure existed long before she entered federal government service. If that's true, it could complicate the argument that the entity was created to conceal something related to her position as Attorney General. Then there's the issue of corporate property ownership. The Palm Beach mansion is titled under a corporate entity rather than an individual. But according to real estate experts, that's not unusual at all. Florida property attorney David Kellerman, who has spent more than 2 decades working with luxury real estate transactions, explained that high-value properties are frequently owned through limited liability companies. According to him, it's standard practice for privacy and liability protection. In other words, owning property through an LLC doesn't automatically mean anything improper happened. Bondi's defenders also point out another important fact. No criminal charges have been filed, not yet. The Department of Justice Inspector General investigation is still in its earliest stage. At this point, investigators are simply gathering information and verifying documents. Bondi herself has not been formally interviewed. Even some members of Congress have acknowledged that distinction. Senator Mark Collins of Tennessee said this week that there's a difference between something looking suspicious and something actually being illegal. That difference matters. Bondi's legal team has also taken a predictable position. They say she cannot respond in detail to documents that were leaked publicly before being formally presented through official investigative channels. From a legal perspective, that's standard advice. Attorneys typically tell clients not to comment on evidence until they've reviewed the full material under proper procedures. Her spokesperson released a short statement Tuesday night saying the Attorney General was confident that any fair review would demonstrate full compliance with ethical and legal obligations. The wording was cautious and vague, but that's how most legal statements are written. Another factor supporters keep mentioning is timing. The controversy erupted during the same week the Department of Justice announced a major prosecution involving a prominent Democratic donor. It also happened during the same week that 3 separate corruption indictments targeting state-level officials were unsealed. 2 of those officials were Democrats. 1 was a Republican. Some political strategists argued the timing could be intentional. Former White House Communications Director Alyssa Chen summarized the concern this way: whenever damaging information appears at the most politically advantageous moment, it's reasonable to ask who benefits. That doesn't automatically mean the information is false, but it does mean politics may be part of the story. And that's why this situation has become so complicated. 2 things could be true at the same time. The documents could raise legitimate questions, and the people leaking those documents could still have political motives. But regardless of those competing interpretations, one reality became clear on Wednesday night. The president himself decided to address the issue publicly, and that decision pushed the story into an entirely different phase. Because once a president signals doubt about a cabinet official's integrity, the clock usually starts ticking. And in this case, that clock may already be moving faster than anyone expected. What happened behind the scenes before the leaks became public is another critical part of this story. According to information included in the filing and conversations referenced by congressional staff, questions about Bondi's financial arrangements didn't appear suddenly this week. They had been circulating quietly for months. Nothing official, nothing public, just rumors moving through Washington's political back channels. In late January, an investigative reporter reportedly filed a series of Freedom of Information Act requests seeking communications related to Bondi's interactions with certain private entities. Normally, those requests take time, weeks, sometimes months, but in this case, the requests were denied unusually quickly. The explanation provided cited national security and internal deliberation exemptions, reasons that some transparency advocates say are often used when agencies want to limit disclosure. Then something else happened. In early February, the same reporter received a visit from FBI agents. The visit was described as routine, an inquiry about sources and document handling. But shortly after that meeting, several individuals who had previously spoken with the reporter stopped returning calls. One former Justice Department official later told a Senate staff member that there appeared to be an effort to keep certain issues contained internally. That observation ended up being included in the filing notes. For a while, it seemed like the effort worked, but eventually the information began circulating outside official channels. And once documents start moving beyond internal oversight structures, controlling the narrative becomes nearly impossible. That's exactly what appears to have happened here. By Monday, the first leak surfaced publicly. By Wednesday, the entire situation was unfolding in real time. But what really made this moment unique was the personal dimension. Remember, the relationship between Trump and Bondi wasn't just professional. It was built on years of political loyalty. Trump had described her in the past as one of the most loyal people he knew. That's why his response carried extra weight. In Washington, loyalty often determines how long someone survives a controversy. In previous administrations, presidents sometimes defended cabinet officials through weeks or even months of investigation. This time, the reaction came within 48 hours, and it wasn't a defense, it was a signal that accountability might be coming. Political analysts immediately began interpreting what that meant. Former White House counsel Gregory Taft, who served for nearly a decade in a previous administration, said that when a president publicly questions a cabinet member's integrity, the relationship is usually finished. In his words, at that point, it becomes a matter of timing, not outcome. Another expert weighed in as well. Michael Raines, a former Department of Justice Inspector General with nearly 2 decades of oversight experience, explained that financial disclosure omissions can carry serious legal consequences if investigators determine they were intentional. Under federal law, knowingly providing false statements on official forms can be prosecuted as a felony. However, intent is the key element investigators must prove. That's not easy. Sometimes disclosure errors are administrative mistakes. Other times they reflect misunderstandings about reporting requirements. Determining which category applies requires extensive investigation. Even people who previously worked closely with Bondi are acknowledging the situation looks serious. Jonathan Hurst, who served as a legal advisor during her transition into office, recently said the optics surrounding the case are extremely damaging. He noted that even if every financial detail eventually has a legal explanation, the political consequences could still be severe. Then there's the broader institutional question. Constitutional law professor Sarah Mendiz described the situation as a real-time test of how executive branch ethics enforcement works. The government has systems designed to investigate conflicts of interest. The challenge is whether those systems will be used fully when the investigation involves one of the most powerful officials in the country. Among experts who have spoken publicly so far, the general consensus seems to be this: criminal liability is possible, but far from certain. Political survival is much less likely. Several analysts predict that if the pressure continues building, resignation within days could become the most realistic outcome. Former federal prosecutor Ellen Chang added another interesting observation. Inspector General investigations rarely begin as quickly as this one did. Normally, initiating such a probe can take weeks of internal review. In this case, it reportedly happened within hours. That speed suggests someone very senior may have pushed for immediate action. Many observers believe that pressure likely came from the White House itself. If that interpretation is correct, it would mean the president's team may have been aware of the allegations before the public leaks occurred. And if they anticipated the story breaking, their strategy may have been to get ahead of it. That would explain the rapid sequence of meetings and public messaging. But while Washington debates the political consequences, there's another question that matters to ordinary people watching this story unfold. Why should anyone outside government care? Because leadership instability at the Department of Justice has real-world consequences. The DOJ oversees thousands of ongoing cases across the country: civil enforcement actions, anti-rust investigations, consumer protection lawsuits, and major criminal prosecutions. When uncertainty appears at the top of the department, those processes can slow down. Prosecutors may delay decisions, defense attorneys may request continuances, judges may allow additional time while leadership questions are resolved. Some lawyers are already reporting that certain cases have been postponed because of uncertainty about departmental priorities, and the ripple effects extend beyond courtrooms. The Attorney General's office controls policy decisions affecting everything from environmental enforcement to civil rights investigations to financial regulations. If leadership changes suddenly, those policies can shift overnight. That's why about 4,000 Justice Department employees are reportedly watching this situation closely. For them, it isn't just political drama. It affects their daily work. It affects which cases move forward. It affects which investigations receive resources. And sometimes it affects careers. But the biggest twist in the story may have come from Bondi's own response. Because when her office finally addressed the situation publicly, the reaction wasn't what many supporters expected, and for some observers, it may have made the situation even worse. Thursday morning arrived with enormous anticipation in Washington. Reporters were waiting to see how the Attorney General would respond. Would there be a detailed explanation, a legal rebuttal, documentation that clarified the financial records? Instead, Bondi's office released a short 2-paragraph statement. The message said the Attorney General remained focused on her duties and would address the allegations through appropriate legal channels. That was it. No detailed breakdown, no direct response to the specific financial questions raised in the filing. Within hours, the statement had been viewed millions of times online, but the reaction was overwhelmingly skeptical. Even some political allies privately admitted the response felt incomplete. Republican strategist Paul Brennan, who has worked on multiple Senate campaigns, summed up the problem simply. He said, "A statement like that needed evidence attached to it. Without documentation, it left too many questions unanswered." Then another development followed. Bondi canceled a scheduled appearance at a law enforcement conference in Atlanta. The official explanation cited a scheduling conflict, but critics pointed out that she had confirmed the event weeks earlier. To many observers, the cancellation signaled that the controversy was becoming too serious to ignore. Shortly afterward, the White House weighed in. During a morning briefing, Press Secretary Dana Holbrook said the president expects every member of his administration to meet the highest ethical standards. She added that he was monitoring the situation closely. The wording stood out: monitoring, not defending. In Washington political language, that difference can mean a lot. Then came another report that added fuel to the speculation. According to Fox News, Bondi met privately with attorney Victor Castellano, a former federal prosecutor who now specializes in high-profile white-collar defense cases. The key detail wasn't just the meeting itself. It was the fact that Castellano is not a government lawyer. He represents clients in personal legal matters. When a cabinet official hires a private defense attorney separate from official government counsel, it usually means they're preparing for potential legal exposure.